Welcome to a journey into the icy heart of mystery. Our story takes place in the winter of 1934, high in the Swiss Alps, where snow falls endlessly and silence lingers like a second shadow. In this world of elegance and isolation, a group of travelers takes refuge in an Alpine lodge, a place meant for warmth and celebration, yet soon tainted by suspicion and fear. When a guest is found dead behind a locked door, the storm outside becomes more than a backdrop. It becomes a barrier. No one can leave. No one can arrive. And so within these frozen walls, every glance, every whisper, every hidden past becomes a clue. Prepare to enter a classic whodunit, a tale. This is Shadows at the Alpine Lodge. The year was 1934, and the Alps had been swallowed by a storm so heavy that even the most seasoned mountaineers dared not venture beyond the narrow roads. The snow fell in great, relentless sheets, smothering sound and light, and turning the world into an endless blur of white. At the heart of this storm, perched high upon a ridge, stood the Alpine Lodge, a grand wooden structure with heavy shutters and tall pointed gables. Its carved balconies, now weighed down by icicles, hinted at the splendor of summer days long past, when tourists filled its rooms and laughter echoed from the valley. But tonight, there was only silence, broken only by the crunch of carriage wheels and the arrival of a small group of weary travelers. The first to step inside was Inspector Alistair Grant, a tall, broad-shouldered man with sharp blue eyes and a heavy wool coat dusted with snow. Though officially on holiday, the inspector carried himself with the air of duty, scanning the room, observing the smallest detail. His profession was a habit he could not abandon. Behind him followed Lady Evelyn Whitcomb, draped in furs, her chin held high. An English aristocrat accustomed to finer winters on the Riviera, she wore her discontent openly. Yet even through her disdain, there was a certain nervousness, as though the isolation of the mountains unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Next came Dr. Emil Schneider, a Swiss physician with round spectacles and a calm, deliberate manner. His gloved hands carried a leather medical bag, though he claimed it was simply precaution. His eyes flickered to each face he passed, as though studying them for signs of hidden ailments. A young couple entered soon after, Clara and Martin Heller, newlyweds from Zurich. Clara's laughter was light and hopeful, a contrast to the storm outside, while Martin, nervous and serious, clutched her hand with possessive insistence. They seemed out of place among the aristocrats and professionals, and yet their presence warmed the otherwise severe gathering. Finally, there was Colonel Charles Ashcroft, retired from the British Army, his mustache waxed and his demeanor commanding. He carried a cane, though he hardly needed it, and wore his medals on his evening coat as though dinner in the Alps were a military ceremony. To him, the storm was merely another battle to be endured. Inside the lounge, a fire roared in the great stone hearth, casting flickering shadows across polished wood and mounted deer antlers. The lodgekeeper, a small, stooped man named Herr Vogel, greeted them with a bow and hurried to take their coats. "The storm grows worse," he warned in a heavy accent. "No one will come or go until it passes. You must make yourselves at home." As trunks were carried upstairs and the travelers gathered near the fire, a curious atmosphere settled among them. They were strangers bound by circumstance, thrown together by a storm that had closed every road. The wind howled at the shutters, and the very isolation of their refuge seemed to draw them into one another's company. Conversation sparked in polite fragments, Lady Evelyn lamenting the chill, Dr. Schneider offering advice on keeping warm, Clara exclaiming over the beauty of the snow, while Martin hovered protectively by her side. Colonel Ashcroft recounted tales of military winters in the Punjab, while Inspector Grant listened quietly, his gaze sharp, noting more than he said. But beneath the civility, there was an unspoken tension. Each seemed to carry more than luggage into the Alpine Lodge secrets, burdens, perhaps regrets. And in the silence between their words, the fire popped, as though the very timbers of the lodge sensed what was to come. Dinner was promised for later, and the guests were shown to their rooms. Long corridors lined with carved oak led to chambers lit by flickering oil lamps. Each door closed with a heavy thud, sealing them in solitude, yet none could escape the howling storm outside. That night, as snow buried the lodge deeper into isolation, the guests prepared for their first evening together. They did not yet know that within these walls, their lives would intertwine in ways they could not imagine, and that before long, one of them would never see the storm's end. The great dining hall of the Alpine Lodge had been prepared with meticulous care. Long oak tables gleamed under the flicker of candelabras, their flames casting golden reflections upon crystal glasses and polished silverware. Outside, the storm continued its furious assault upon the shutters, but inside there was warmth, laughter, and the promise of a meal meant to distract from the raging snow. Herr Vogel moved between the tables like a discreet shadow, ensuring every dish was placed in perfect order. He was assisted by his niece, a timid young woman named Elsa, whose wide eyes darted nervously from guest to guest, as though the gathering unsettled her. The guests assembled in their evening attire. Lady Evelyn, draped once again in her furs despite the warmth, occupied a place of prominence at the head of the table. She toyed with her wine glass, her lips curved in a faint smile that was more calculation than joy. Opposite her sat Colonel Ashcroft, his medals catching the candlelight, his voice carrying across the hall as he retold a tale of jungle campaigns. Inspector Grant, though officially on holiday, had taken a seat midway down the table. He ate sparingly, his eyes observing, cataloging gestures, Clara's shy glances, Martin's stiff posture, Dr. Schneider's calm composure. Grant's instinct told him that in gatherings such as these, the truth often revealed itself not in words, but in silences and stolen looks. Dr. Schneider himself was quiet, though when spoken to, he replied with precision, his tone measured and kind. He offered Lady Evelyn medical advice for her delicate constitution, though she waved him off with a laugh that sounded forced. The young Hellers, seated together, seemed eager to make conversation. Clara spoke of their honeymoon, her eyes shining with genuine delight, while Martin interjected frequently, ensuring no detail of their travels was misunderstood. Inspector Grant noted the way Clara's laughter dimmed each time Martin's hand tightened around hers. As the first course was served, steaming bowls of consommé, the atmosphere softened. The storm outside became a distant hum, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the lodge were an island of civility amidst a sea of chaos. Yet even islands hold shadows. Colonel Ashcroft leaned across the table, his voice booming. Strange, is it not, that fate should gather us here, cut off from the world, like a regiment snowed in behind enemy lines. He chuckled at his own metaphor, but his eyes glimmered with something harder. Lady Evelyn replied, "Isolation can be quite the luxury, Colonel, provided one's company is agreeable." Her gaze swept the table, lingering on each guest as though weighing their worth. It was then that Elsa, in serving the wine, dropped a decanter. The glass shattered, crimson liquid spilling like blood across the linen. The guests gasped, and Elsa flushed scarlet, stammering apologies as she gathered the shards with trembling hands. Herr Vogel rushed to her side, dismissing her with a sharp whisper. The moment passed, but a chill remained, as though the accident had been an omen. The main course arrived, roasted venison with herbs, accompanied by potatoes and spiced rinabbage. Conversation resumed, though now with an undercurrent of strain. Inspector Grant found himself seated beside Dr. Schneider. "You seem to watch them all, Herr Inspector," the doctor murmured softly, as though reading his thoughts. Grant gave a wry smile. "A habit I cannot unlearn. People reveal themselves most clearly when they believe no one is observing." "And what have you seen tonight?" the doctor asked, adjusting his spectacles. "That everyone here carries a weight heavier than the storm," Grant replied, his tone quiet but certain. Dessert followed, a delicate apple strudel dusted with sugar, yet the sweetness of the dish could not disguise the sourness that lingered between certain guests. Clara grew quieter, her gaze often drifting toward Lady Evelyn, who seemed amused by the young woman's presence. Martin grew more rigid, his fork clattering once upon his plate. Colonel Ashcroft and Lady Evelyn exchanged barbed remarks, wrapped in civility but sharp nonetheless. Finally, as the final course was cleared, Herr Vogel rose and declared, "Ladies and gentlemen, I trust you will find your rooms prepared for a comfortable night. The storm continues, but the lodge is safe, and tomorrow we shall have breakfast at 8. The guests dispersed slowly, the echoes of their conversations fading into the long corridors. Yet beneath the polished manners and the gentle glow of candles, unease stirred. Something invisible yet undeniable had taken hold of the Alpine lodge. Later that night, as the storm raged stronger, a door closed softly in one of the upper corridors. Footsteps moved quietly along the carpeted hall. Somewhere, a lock clicked shut, and by dawn, one guest would never awaken again. Morning came slowly to the Alps. The storm had not abated. If anything, it had grown more ferocious, swallowing the peaks in a blinding haze of white. The shutters of the Alpine lodge rattled beneath the weight of the wind, while inside the fire burned low, its embers fighting to keep the cold at bay. Herr Vogel was the first to rise, moving with quiet efficiency as he prepared breakfast for his distinguished guests. The scent of coffee and bread began to drift through the corridors, coaxing the travelers from their rooms. One by one they appeared in the lounge, bleary-eyed yet eager for warmth. Lady Evelyn descended the staircase in a silk robe, her expression sour. "I hardly slept," she announced to no one in particular. The storm roared as if it intended to break down the walls. "I insist this is most unsuitable." Dr. Schneider offered a gentle bow. "The altitude, madam, can unsettle the nerves. A cup of coffee will steady you." Colonel Ashcroft entered next, cane striking the floor with each deliberate step. "Nonsense. A soldier sleeps through cannon fire. One cannot let weather dictate one's composure." He took his place near the hearth, his eyes narrowing at the flames. The Hellers soon joined, Clara bright but weary, Martin stern and protective, his hand at her back. They murmured polite greetings, yet a tension seemed to linger between them, sharpened by the isolation. But Inspector Grant had not yet appeared. His absence was noted with mild curiosity until footsteps echoed on the staircase. The inspector emerged, his face grave, his tone clipped. "One of our party has not come down. I went to rouse him, but the door was locked from within." The room fell silent. "Which room?" Colonel Ashcroft demanded. "The second on the east corridor," Grant replied. Colonel Dr. Schneider, come with me. Herr Vogel, fetch the spare keys. Together they climbed the stairs, the air heavy with dread. At the end of the narrow hall, the inspector stopped before a heavy oak door. He rapped firmly. "Mr. Blackwood, are you awake?" No reply came, only the howling of the storm through the distant shutters. Herr Vogel hurried forward with the ring of keys, his hands trembling as he fumbled through them. At last, one fit the lock. Yet when he turned it, the mechanism refused to yield. "It is bolted from the inside," he whispered. Inspector Grant exchanged a glance with Colonel Ashcroft. "Then we shall have to force it." With a single strike of his shoulder, Grant broke the latch. The door swung inward with a groan, revealing a scene that froze them all. Edward Blackwood, the wealthy industrialist who had traveled alone, sat slumped in an armchair beside the window. His complexion was ashen, his lips tinged blue. A half-empty glass of brandy rested upon the table at his side, and scattered cards lay upon the rug, as though a game had been interrupted. His eyes stared blankly at the snow beyond the glass, unseeing, unmoving. Dr. Schneider rushed forward, placing fingers at the man's neck, then shaking his head. "He is gone. Hours, perhaps." Colonel Ashcroft grunted. "Heart, was it? The man drank enough brandy last night to drown a regiment." But Inspector Grant's eyes narrowed. He moved closer, examining the glass, the bottle beside it, the faint scent that lingered in the air. His gaze traveled to the door, bolted securely from within, and the single frost-covered window, latched tightly. "No one entered," Herr Vogel whispered, his voice trembling. "No one could have entered. The door was locked, the window sealed. It is impossible." Grant's expression hardened. "And yet, Mr. Blackwood is dead, which means the impossible has happened." By now the rest of the guests had gathered in the doorway, their faces pale, their breaths quick. Clara clutched Martin's arm, eyes wide with horror. Lady Evelyn raised a gloved hand to her mouth, her composure cracking at last. Colonel Ashcroft stood grim, his soldier's instinct recognizing the weight of the moment. Grant rose to his full height, his voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is no ordinary misfortune. Mr. Blackwood did not die by accident. He was murdered." The declaration fell upon them like the weight of an avalanche. Gasps filled the corridor. Accusations glimmered in their eyes, though no one dared speak them aloud. "But the door," Lady Evelyn cried. "It was locked. You saw it yourself." Grant's gaze swept the room. Locked doors are puzzles, not impossibilities. Somewhere in this lodge, the key to this mystery lies. Until it is solved, I must insist. No one leaves. No one acts alone. From this moment forward, every one of us is both a witness and a suspect. The storm howled louder, battering the walls with icy fury. Within the lodge, silence reigned, broken only by the crackling fire and the hammering of fearful hearts. And so it began. The hunt for a killer who had struck within the safety of four walls, vanishing like a shadow into the storm. The body of Edward Blackwood had been moved to a small side chamber, covered with a white linen sheet. Yet even hidden from sight, the presence of death lingered throughout the Alpine lodge like an unwelcome guest. Inspector Grant wasted no time. He gathered the party in the lounge, where the fire burned brightly, though it gave little comfort. Outside, the storm raged on, erasing all hope of leaving the mountain. "Let us speak plainly," he began, his voice calm but resolute. "One of us is a murderer. The locked door does not absolve us. It challenges us. Blackwood was poisoned. Of that I am certain. The question is not how the poison was delivered, but by whom." The words fell like stones. Clara gasped softly, while Martin's jaw clenched, his arm protectively around her shoulders. Lady Evelyn exhaled sharply, indignation flashing across her face. "Inspector, this is intolerable. Do you truly suggest that among us respectable guests lies a killer?" Grant's eyes did not waver. "I suggest nothing. I observe. And what I observe is that each of you had opportunity. Motive may yet be hidden, but opportunity is plain." Colonel Ashcroft cleared his throat, his voice gravelly. "I had no dealings with the man beyond dinner. Blackwood was a pompous fellow, but hardly worth murder." Dr. Schneider adjusted his spectacles. "And yet, Colonel, you sat nearest him when the brandy was poured." The colonel bristled. "Are you accusing me, Doctor?" "I accuse no one," Schneider replied evenly. "But facts are facts. The glass was at his right hand, nearest your place at the table." Grant watched the exchange carefully, filing away the sharpness of tone, the flickers of resentment. He turned to Herr Vogel. "Who served the drinks?" "I did, sir," the lodgekeeper answered, his voice unsteady. "Each guest was given a glass, but the bottle itself was on the table. Any hand could have touched it." Lady Evelyn's laughter rang out, brittle and sharp. "So we are to suspect one another like school children? How utterly absurd! Perhaps poor Mr. Blackwood drank too freely and brought this upon himself." "Poison does not pour itself, Lady Evelyn," Grant said dryly. Silence followed, broken only by the storm pressing against the windows. It was Clara who finally spoke, her voice trembling. Perhaps it was not one of us. Could someone from outside?" Inspector Grant shook his head. "No. The lodge is sealed. No one entered through that storm. No one left. The killer is here among us." The words hung heavy in the air, undeniable, final. By afternoon, tensions had begun to boil. Colonel Ashcroft paced the hall like a caged lion, muttering of dishonor. Lady Evelyn retreated to her chamber, claiming a headache, though whispers said she had been seen weeping in the corridor. Martin prowled after Clara's every step, his jealousy laid bare when she lingered too long in conversation with Dr. Schneider. Even Elsa, the timid maid, seemed shaken beyond reason. Twice Herr Vogel caught her lingering near the locked chamber, where Blackwood's body lay, her eyes wide, as though the dead might speak secrets only she could hear. Grant used the hours to probe, his questions gentle yet precise. From Vogel, he learned that Blackwood had been a frequent guest at the lodge years earlier, often arriving with companions whose names the innkeeper dared not repeat. From Clara, he heard whispers of a scandal involving Blackwood and a vanished fortune. From Ashcroft, he extracted the admission that he had once crossed paths with the man in business and had left with a bitter grudge. But the inspector knew better than to accept stories at face value. Lies travel swiftly when truth is dangerous. As dusk fell, the storm eased for a brief moment, revealing the jagged peaks beyond. Grant stepped outside, his boots sinking deep into the snow. The mountains loomed like silent sentinels, indifferent to human folly. Yet even in their stillness, he felt the weight of unseen eyes. When he returned, he found Clara alone by the fire, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "You seem troubled," he observed. She looked up, her eyes glistening. "Everyone seems so certain, Inspector, but I feel as though the walls themselves are closing in. What if the killer strikes again?" Grant's reply was quiet, almost gentle. "Then it is my duty to stop them before they do." But even as he spoke, He could not shake the certainty that the killer would indeed strike again. Murderers rarely stop with one, not when fear and suspicion serve as their weapons. And as the candles burned low in the Alpine lodge, shadows stretched long across the floor, whispering secrets no one yet dared to speak. Night settled over the lodge with a suffocating weight. The storm had eased, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the wind's howl. Every creak of timber, every crack of the fire made the guests startle, as though the very walls had joined in the conspiracy. Inspector Grant had insisted the party dine together again, though the atmosphere was now stripped of all civility. The long oak table felt more like a tribunal than a feast. Plates of roast chicken and bread went untouched. Every eye watched the others too closely to eat. Lady Evelyn broke the silence first, her tone sharp. "This is madness. We sit here like prisoners while you, Inspector, play judge and jury. What proof have you that poor Mr. Blackwood did not simply drink himself to death?" Grant's gaze was steady. "The proof is in the bottle. A trace of bitter almond, unmistakable. Cyanide. He did not pour it for himself." The words fell like frost, chilling the air further. Clara shivered and leaned closer to Martin, who muttered under his breath about leaving as soon as the storm allowed. Colonel Ashcroft's hand clenched tightly around his cane, his knuckles white. "Cyanide," Dr. Schneider repeated thoughtfully. "A poison that acts swiftly. It could have been slipped into his glass in a moment." "Or prepared beforehand," Grant added. His eyes swept the table. "Consider this. The bottle was shared, but only Blackwood's drink carried death, which means the killer prepared his fate deliberately." Martin's voice cut in, tight with anger. "Why him? Why Blackwood?" Grant studied the young man. "An excellent question. Perhaps because Blackwood carried enemies, debts, and secrets in equal measure. Or perhaps because his death conceals another motive entirely." Colonel Ashcroft pushed his plate away. "I won't sit here while suspicion clouds my name. Yes, I knew the man years ago. He cheated me out of an investment. But I am no poisoner." Lady Evelyn gave a brittle laugh. "Oh, come now, Colonel. You bark like a soldier, but men have killed for far less than money. And you sat nearest his glass." The Colonel glared. "And you, madam, had more than idle reason. Your husband lost half his fortune in dealings with Blackwood. You'd have gladly seen him rot." Her eyes flashed, but she said nothing. The silence was damning enough. Inspector Grant allowed the accusations to hang before speaking. "Let us not forget others who had cause. Dr. Schneider, a man of science, knows more of poisons than any here. Herr Vogel, you handled the decanter yourself. And Martin," the young man stiffened. "What of me?" "Your wife spoke kindly of Blackwood last night," Grant said evenly. "You did not. I saw your hand tighten each time her laughter strayed in his direction." Clara flushed. "That is unfair, Inspector. I never—" "Quiet, Clara," Martin snapped, his face reddening. "The man was nothing, less than nothing." Grant leaned back, observing the crack that had widened in their marriage within a single evening. He made no further remark, yet the suspicion had taken root in every mind. After dinner, the guests drifted apart, each retreating into private corners. Ashcroft smoked heavily by the hearth, his gaze never leaving Lady Evelyn. She, in turn, scribbled furiously in a leather-bound journal, snapping it shut whenever anyone passed. Dr. Schneider retreated to the library, consulting volumes with an intensity that seemed almost frantic. Clara wandered the halls, pale and restless, trailed always by Martin's watchful shadow. Grant moved quietly among them, his ears attuned to whispers. He caught fragments, a sharp exchange between Ashcroft and Evelyn about debts unpaid, a muttered word from Schneider about antidotes, a muffled sob from Clara in the stairwell. Each was a thread, and he alone held the task of weaving them into truth. Near midnight, Herr Vogel approached him, wringing his hands. "Inspector, there is something I must say. Blackwood. He was no stranger here. Years ago, he came with another party. A man disappeared then, too. It was never spoken of, but—" He faltered, glancing over his shoulder as though afraid the walls might overhear. Grant pressed him. "Who was this man?" "I cannot say," Vogel whispered. But Blackwood was feared. He dealt in more than business. Secrets, Inspector. Dark secrets. And perhaps one of those secrets followed him here. The revelation only deepened the mire. Grant retired to his chamber, his mind heavy with suspicion. He knew one truth for certain. Killers rarely hide behind obvious guilt. No, they wore innocence like a mask, polished and convincing, until the moment it cracked. As he extinguished the lamp, the wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere in the lodge, a door creaked softly open. A figure moved in the shadows, unseen, unheard. And before dawn broke, another secret would bleed into the snow. Morning broke clear and cold, the storm finally spent. Snow lay heavy on the roof and window ledges, dazzling in the pale sun. Yet inside the Alpine lodge, no light could warm the chill of suspicion. Inspector Grant summoned everyone to the lounge. The fire crackled, though its glow seemed feeble against the tension in the room. One by one, the guests took their seats. Colonel Ashcroft, stiff with pride. Lady Evelyn, veiled in her black shawl. Martin and Clara, pale and uneasy. Dr. Schneider, adjusting his spectacles with nervous precision. Herr Vogel, hovering at the edges. They waited in silence as Grant stood before the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm but resonant. "The time has come to lift the mask. Edward Blackwood was not the victim of chance nor of nature's cruelty. He was murdered, deliberately, by someone in this room." A murmur rippled through the party, but Grant pressed on. The locked chamber posed the first riddle. Yet it was no riddle at all. The door was secured not from within, but from without, using a simple thread loop passed through the key and pulled shut, a trick as old as crime itself. The killer wished us to marvel at impossibility, but such illusions unravel under scrutiny. He paced slowly, his gaze sliding from face to face. The poison, cyanide, was the second key. It was placed not in the decanter, but in Blackwood's very glass. Only one among you had the chance to tamper with it unseen, while the others were distracted by conversation. Ashcroft bristled. "You mean me, Inspector? I sat nearest his hand, yes, but I swear I did no such thing." "You did not," Grant agreed. "Your anger is honest, if untempered. And Lady Evelyn, though your family lost dearly to Blackwood, your grief is genuine, not the mask of a killer." Her eyes widened, surprised by the reprieve. Grant turned. "Herr Vogel, you served the drinks, but your trembling hands speak of fear, not cunning. And Martin Hargrove, your jealousy was loud enough to draw attention, too loud for a murderer's silence." Martin's face burned crimson. Clara gripped his hand, though her own was cold as ice. "That leaves two," Grant continued. "Dr. Schneider and Clara." The room froze. Clara's lips parted in shock. "Me? Inspector?" You cannot." Grant's voice softened, but his eyes were hard. "On the contrary, you alone poured Blackwood's second glass when he complained his was half filled. You leaned across, smiling, charming, and in that moment no one noticed the drop you placed within." Schneider's brow furrowed. "But why her?" Grant's tone deepened. "Because Blackwood held power over her. Years ago, before her marriage, he ensnared her in his schemes, debts, perhaps worse. He threatened to expose her, ruin her, unless she complied with his demands. The storm brought them together once more, and she saw only one escape." Clara's face drained of color. She clutched Martin's arm as though to anchor herself, but the truth had already landed like a blade. "You wore innocence as a mask, Mrs. Hargrove," Grant said quietly, "but masks crack under fear. I saw it in your eyes each time Blackwood's name was spoken. I heard it in your sobs when you thought yourself alone. You killed not from greed, but from desperation." A silence fell, heavier than any storm. Finally, Clara whispered, "He would never have stopped. He said he would destroy us. I had no choice." Martin recoiled, torn between rage and pity. "Clara." "My God," Grant bowed his head. "Murder is never choice without consequence, yet the truth is laid bare. Blackwood's sins bred hatred enough to end him, and in the end, justice is no clearer in these mountains than the snow that buries all traces of our steps." Herr Vogel crossed himself. Lady Evelyn wept silently. Ashcroft muttered of honor and ruin. Grant closed the matter with a single phrase. "The law will decide her fate, but the mask has fallen. The shadows no longer whisper." Outside, the snow glittered under the pale sun, indifferent to the secrets it had witnessed. Inside, silence reigned, the silence of revelation, of guilt laid bare, of an Alpine lodge that would forever be haunted by shadows.